Welcome to the Essential Geopolitics podcast from Stratfor, part of the RANE network. I'm Emily Donahue. In this podcast, I'm speaking with Michael Monderer, Stratfor's senior analyst for global economics. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Emily. It's a pleasure to be here.
I think it might be time for an update on the global economic impacts of COVID-19. The United States is in the middle of a resurgence. Some states are considering reinstituting lockdowns, and the economy's not looking strong. What's the current global economic outlook?
Well, as you might expect, Emily, the global outlook is not very good. We're approaching the end of the second quarter, the end of June, and the forecasts are all in one direction, that is uniformly down. We've just had the IMF come out with a revision to its forecast. The IMF, incidentally, is among the more optimistic prognosticators, and it's calling for a nearly 5% fall in global production this year, and a cumulative economic loss over the next 2 years, it's 2020 and 2021, of about $12.5 trillion. So it's just not looking good overall. I should note that private forecasters see as much as a 12% decline in the global economy this year if things do not go well.
So let's talk about that. I mean, how reliable are the assessments and forecasts?
Unfortunately, the forecasts are not very reliable. We're in a rather unprecedented situation. Economic models are based on long-standing relationships among the variables, and those seem to have broken down in the current circumstances. We don't have data that's able to keep up with us in real time. We're having to, economic data by its very nature is backward looking. We're having to look at alternatives to real-time economic data, things like traffic congestion, mortgage applications, a lot of high-frequency indicators that we get on a weekly basis, and we don't yet know how well those are correlated with long-term growth. So we're in a sort of new world here where the models are not very useful.
Where are there likely, in your estimation, then, to be continuing problems?
Well, let's start with the labor market. Just in the United States alone, since March, we've lost somewhere between 40 and 45 million jobs. I mean, that's an incredible number of jobs lost. That's something like 1/4 of the labor force. Now, that number is not reflected fully in the unemployment numbers. That's the highest unemployment we've had since the Great Depression. And clearly something is going to have to be done to replace the lost income. People are simply not going to be demanding products, and businesses are not going to be investing to the extent that they were previously. And you're going to have losses in both supply and demand.
Yeah, it's starting to look a little bit empty shelves, I should say, when I risk it to go out to a store. Supply and demand, I think, is off.
Yeah, well, we've known since the very beginning that supply chains have been disrupted. Here in Texas, we had a situation where we thought we were going to have meat shortages. So some people went out and bought huge amounts of meat to put in their freezers. It hasn't quite turned out that way. But the fact is that if people don't have income and can't buy the products they need because they don't have jobs, that's going to be very hard for there to be a balance in supply and demand, and we're to see further economic effects.
Michael, which countries or groups of countries will be the most affected?
Well, obviously you have the developed countries being very affected by the lockdown, but in fact, emerging markets are probably going to be more affected as a whole. The only country globally that shows any chance of having any positive growth this year is China, and even that's going to be about 1%, which will be the lowest level of growth China's had in something like 40 years. So the emerging markets, who are dependent on exports particularly, and dependent on external capital flows, are going to be hit especially hard. One of the things that worries us the most is that that's going to have an effect on their ability to service debt.
Wow, there's a lot to keep up with there. Michael, thank you so much for your guidance.
You're welcome, Emily. There's a reason economics is called the dismal science.
Michael Monderer, Stratfor Senior Analyst for Global Economics for Stratfor, a RANE company. If you'd like to read Michael's geopolitical forecasts and analysis, subscribe to Stratfor Worldview. Podcast listeners get a special rate. Go to Stratfor.com/podcast offer. That's all one word. Stratfor.com/podcast offer. I'm Emily Donahue. Thanks for listening.